Hello class, welcome to another class with Professor Choi. Today we're going to be talking about comparative advantage and what exactly is the market system. Now before we start, we need to understand the issue of scarcity again. The issue of scarcity is usually brought up in beginning chapters in macro and microeconomics, and scarcity is basically a situation in which you have unlimited ones that exceed the limited resources that you have. As a consequence of that, you have to trade off something. So if you're a country and you say you want to have more good A's, then you have to give up good B's in order to obtain those. So you can only obtain one thing, basically, if you give up something else. You can't really have both at the same time. The production possibility frontier is a model that allows us to kind of talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the production possibility frontier is basically a curve showing the maximum attainable combinations of two products that may be produced with available resources and current technology. So let's go ahead and graph it. All right, so imagine that this is a fictitious country of, let's call it Choitopia. And the country of Choitopia can produce two products. So this is, let's call it product A. And over here we can produce product B. Now if I took all of my resources, my land, my labor, my capital, and my entrepreneurship, and I just plug them in and say I only want to produce good A, then we can represent that by selecting a point here on A. Now that point is going to represent basically the maximum amount of A that we want to produce without producing any B. So this point represents a sort of QA quantity of A, comma 0B. So we're not going to make any B. All right, now imagine that I took all of my resources instead and I put them for the production of B. So instead I put them over here. Now this point represents a point where I'm only producing B and I'm not going to produce any A. So this is a 0, comma maximum level of QB. All right, now between those 2 points is our scarcity problem and our trade-off issue. So if I want to produce a combination of A and B, then basically the only way to go is if I want more A, I got to give up some B. And if I want some B, I got to give up some A. Don't really have a choice about that. All right? So this is what the production possibility frontier is. This is my production possibility frontier, or PPF for short. So the PPF basically explains that there's always a trade-off between A and B. And the trade-off is, in this case, the slope of the line. Now, the three basic ways to show you a sort of a trade-off using a PPF. So one way is this one where you have a straight line. And in this case, we are exhibiting constant opportunity cost. We can also have a production possibility frontier that is kind of like bow out from the center, kind of like this. And this sort of production possibility frontier exhibits increasing opportunity cost. So every time you want more A or more B, if you start on the other side, you got to give up more and more in order to do that. You can also have a production possibility frontier that is bowing from the center. So like this. And this sort of production possibility frontier exhibits decreasing opportunity cost. Now, if you remember the concept of opportunity cost from previous chapters, opportunity cost is basically the trade-off, or what you have to give up. So if I start, say, at this point on the line, call it point 1, and I want to move down to point 2, by moving down to point 2, I'm going to gain some A, but I have to give up some B in order to do that. And whatever I gave up is the trade-off. So if this is point, say, 10, and the maximum here, say, it's 20, and this right here, say the maximum is, let's stick with 20, and let's say that this number is 17, where this point is, then basically I have to, in order to gain 10A, I gotta give up 3B. So the opportunity cost of 10A is 3B in this particular case. If you're moving from point 1 to point 2 and you gain 10 while giving up 3. All right, so again, opportunity cost is what you gotta give up. Now, in terms of production, you can produce anywhere inside the line or on the line, but outside the line, it's not possible for a country to produce. So if I were to pick a production point, say there, call it Z1, then we're going to say for this particular model that that point Z1 that point is attainable, but we're going to say that this is what inefficient looks like. Now the reason this point is inefficient is because we could basically do better by using our resources better and moving towards the line. Now if I were to pick a point on the line, and on the line could be anywhere on the line, let's call this Z2, okay, then point Z2 is what we're going to define as efficient. So we're going to say that this point is attainable, at least theoretically, and we're also going to say that this point is efficient. Now any point outside the line, it's just not possible, okay? So if I were to look at point Z3, C3 is not possible, it's unattainable. So C3 under the current conditions is unattainable. Alright, so let's take this model a little farther. First of all, let's learn how to calculate opportunity cost. So let's say I have here my quantity of A that I can produce. Say I have here my quantity of B, and I have my production possibility from 2. Alright, now let's say that this maximum point over here is 200, and let's say that the maximum point over here is 100. Alright, now let's say that I ask you a question like, what is the opportunity cost of 20 units of QA? Alright, now this question is very similar to saying something like, I want to get 20 units of QA. So I want to lease plus 20 QA. And the question is asking you, what do I need to give up? So how much QB do I need to give up in order to obtain those 20 QA. So if I were to move from, say, point 1 here to point 2 here, then how much B do I have to give up? And that's the question right here. What is the opportunity cost? All right. Now, to get this opportunity cost, if you can't see it right away, by the way, because the answer is 10, but if you can't see it right away, let's set it up like a math problem. So let's set up a proportion. We know the endpoints here. And let's set up a QA, QB proportion. Okay, so I'm going to put QA at the top, 200 here. We have a straight line, so we can do this. We got 100 here for B. Now, I want an extra 20 QA. And the question is, how much B do I have to give up? So the answer for this is to cross multiply and divide. So to get the answer for X, I got to do 100 times 20 divided by 200. And that is 10. So I got to give up 10 B in order to obtain 20 QA. So the opportunity cost of 20 QA is 10 QB. All right, let's come up with another one. All right, so let's set up our production possibility frontier again. This is still going to be QA. It's still going to be QB. Let's say that now I'll put 100 here and 300 here. And I ask you, what is the opportunity cost of 10, let's do 30 QB. Alright, so what is the opportunity cost of 30 QB is basically asking you how much QA do I have to give up. So if I wanted to have at least 30 QB, if I want to be there at least at 30, then how many QA do I have to give up in order to do that? So this is the question that we're asking ourselves. All right, it's very similar to saying I was in point 1 and I want to move up to point 2. So if I want 30 QB, how many QA do I have to give up? So let's use the same sort of proportion strategy we had before. So I'm going to do a QA QB proportion. So I put 300 QA at the top, and then I put the 100 QB on the bottom. Now in this case, we want to add 30 QB, and we don't know how much QA we got to give up. So in order to get the answer, we got to cross multiply and divide. So X is equal to 30 times 300 divided by 100. And the answer should be 90. All right? So you got to give up 90 QA in order to obtain 30 QB. All right, now what exactly is the point again of the understanding the production possibility frontier? Well, the biggest thing is to understand that a country cannot have it all. That every time you're making more A, you got to give up B, or every time you want more lettuce, you got to give up some tomatoes. You can't do lettuce and tomato on the same piece of land. I think most people understand that on a kind of like basic way, but when they talk, sometimes they don't really seem to understand. So it's not possible for somebody to have absolutely everything. You always got to give up something in order to obtain something. In economics, by the way, we always like to say that there's no such a thing as a free lunch, because there's no such a thing as free. There's always at least an opportunity cost to everything. All right, now let's talk a little bit about economic growth. So economic growth is the ability of a country to basically grow over time. So economic growth shows up on the production possibility frontier by basically saying that the line is going to shift outwards. So if we have an increase in resources, and remember that economic resources are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So if you have an increase in land or an increase in labor, for example, then there'll be economic growth or potential for economic growth. If you have an increase in technology, you'll have the same. So an increase in technology or an increase in resources is going to shift your production possibility frontier outwards, and we're going to move the line higher. What that basically means is that you have the ability to produce more A and B. All right. Now, imagine though that you found a technological advance, but it only makes you better at producing A, not B. So for whatever reason, you found some kind of technology. So as an increase in technology, but only for QA. And again, I'm assuming we put QA down here. So how will the production possibility frontier shift? Now in this case, what would happen with the increase in technology is we're going to be able to produce more A. So now the maximum QA, it's going to increase. But because it's only on A, then the maximum for QB does not increase. So the way we represent that is by kind of tilting the line in that direction. So the B amount will stay the same, but we have economic growth. All right, now let's explain another very kind of basic thing in economics. Imagine that these two are basically food and other. That's not food. All right, imagine that before you were producing here. Again, let's call that point Z. So you were producing here at point Z. And you have this increase in technology. Now, because of this increase in technology, the line is going to shift like this. But you don't need to produce more A if you don't want to. Imagine that you are happy with the quantity of A that you produce. It satisfies the food needs in your society. Then one of the things that you could do is you can make more B, because you can pick this point and just go straight up this way and select your production Z2 up here, where you have the same amount of A as before, but an increase in the quantity of B produced. So something interesting about what the production possibility frontiers tell you. Increases in technology or increases in resources in any area can help you in any other area, because you don't really have to pick the production point and make more production of whatever you have the technology on. You could reallocate the resources more efficiently and move them to the production of the other product instead. And this is something that's been happening basically in the entire world for the last 200 years or so. If you go back to the 1800s, in the US, we used to use something like 93% to 95% of our population for the production of food. Because of the advances of technology and all that, fast forward today, we only use about 1.5% of our population for the production of food. Now, we use plenty of other people for distribution and selling and so on, but for the production of food, we only use 1.5%. And we produce more food today than we did 200 years ago. All right. Another thing we could do with the production possibility frontier is talk about the issue of international trade and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is the ability of an individual, firm, or country to produce more of a good or service than its competitors using the same amount of resources. Comparative advantage, on the other hand, is the ability of an individual, firm, or a country to produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost. So let's talk about the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. Alright, now to understand the difference between absolute and comparative advantage, let's set up these two fake countries. So let's say we have this country called the United States, and right next to that country, there's the island of Choito. All right, the US can produce A. Sorry, we're putting B up here, so we'll stick with that. And we can produce A, they can produce A as well. All right, now the United States is a really large country. So let's put the maximum amount of A I say 300, and let's put the maximum amount of B here at 300. All right, so again, these points are the end points here, 300, 300. All right, now for Choitopia, Choitopia can produce, say, a similar amount of A, but not the same. Well, that took the whole thing out. Do it again. All right, so let's say Choitopia can produce the same amount of A, but less B. So let's say the maximum QA for Choitopia is 300, but the maximum amount of QB is only 100. All right, notice, by the way, that if you take the Choitopia graph, you could basically put it right in here inside of the US graph, because it would basically fit right here at the 100 level for QB. So this country is much larger basically than this country. All right, now let's talk about what exactly is absolute advantage. So absolute advantage is when we take a look at the endpoints and we figure out who can produce more. So you look at the endpoint for Choitopia, you look at the endpoint for the US for QA, and you notice that those two numbers are the same. So on QA, no one has absolute advantage. But on QB, there's an obvious absolute advantage. So if you look at the maximum number for QB, the US can produce 300 and Choitopia can produce 100. So the US has absolute advantage on QB production. Okay? So absolute advantage is comparing the maximum number. Now comparative advantage is comparing the opportunity costs. Now to compare the opportunity costs, we have to compare the ratio of the numbers. So we're going to do the QA over QB ratio and compare those two. Alright, so QA over QB ratio for the two countries. Now for Choitopia, the number is 300 over 100. And for the US, the number is 300 over 300. Notice that the ratio for Choitopia is higher than the ratio for the US. So Choitopia has a comparative advantage on QA. All right. Instead, let's flip the ratio. So let's now compare the QB over QBA ratio. All right. Notice for Choitopia, the ratio is now 100 over 300, and for the US, the ratio is 300 over 300, because it stays the same even if you flip. Notice that now the US ratio is greater than the Choitopia ratio, so the US has comparative advantage on QB. All right. Now this presents us with something interesting. An economist called David Ricardo basically said that the basis for international trade is comparative advantage, not absolute advantage. So even small countries can benefit by trading with big countries, and big countries can benefit by trading with small countries, because the basis for international trade is comparative advantage, not absolute advantage. Now, in order to prove his point, let's kind of like keep this going. All right, now, according to David Ricardo, if you have two countries with different comparative advantages, like you do here, notice that the US has comparative advantage on QB and Choitopia has comparative advantage on QA, then the country of the US should produce whatever they have a comparative advantage on and trade with the other country. And the country of Choitopia will have to produce whatever they have a comparative advantage on and then trade it with the other country. Now, to take this example a little farther, let's talk about the actual production point before, so we can visualize our gains from trade. Now imagine that the US before was producing 150, 150. And again, this is very crucial here to understanding this. Even though your maximum is 300, 300, you cannot produce 300, 300. You have to give up something in order to obtain the other. So the best you could do if you want both is 150, 150, and that's what this point is. All right, now when you buy yourself, your consumption and your production are the same. Because when you buy yourself, you're not trading with anybody. All right, now let's say that Choitopia, for whatever reason, wanted to produce here on this point. And again, we haven't really talked about A and B. You know, A could be food, B could be something else. Maybe they just want to eat. All right, so this is the production for Choitopia. All right, so again, when you buy yourself, your consumption and your production are the same thing. All right, so let's think about that for a second. So alone, by yourself, no trade. All right, now let's take a look at the production of A and B. Now the production of QA for both countries is equal to the production of the US plus the production of Choitopia. So production of QA and production of QB All right, so production of QA for the US is 150, and production of QB is also 150. For Choitopia, they produce 100 QB but 0 QA. So basically the total production of QA and QB is 150 QA and 250 QB. Again, that's the total production alone for both countries. All right, now let's take a look at why comparative advantage is the way to go in international trade. According to David Ricardo, every country should specialize on whatever they're good at. So imagine that I took the US and I place their production in whatever they're best at, which in this case we decided again that it's going to be QB. So the US will have to switch their entire production to only QB. And this will be the production point after trade. By the same token, if we want to collaborate, the US, the Choitopia would have to produce whatever they have a comparative advantage in, which in this case is QA. So they would have to switch their entire production point all the way down here. And this will have to be their production after trade. All right, now let's take a look at what would happen if we were to do that. So this is production after trade. Okay, got QA, we got QB. Now notice that because of specialization, the US is only going to make QB. So they're going to produce 300 QB, sorry, 0 QA, and then 300 QB. Notice that Choitopia, because of specialization, is going to be producing 300 QA, but 0 QB. Now notice how there is a potential here. Because if you look at the total production in the world, there's now 300 QA, 300 QB. So there is extra production compared to before. And the extra production is the extra from this point to this new QA, and the extra from QB to this QB. And that extra, in this case, an extra 150 QA can be produced, and an extra 50 QB can also be produced. All right, so notice that just by following the specialization idea David Ricardo proposed, the production in the world can go up. But the question is, so am I going to be satisfied compared to before? Am I going to be the same as before? So in order for that to work, we need to come up with an international trade agreement that both countries can agree on. Okay, so let's come up with a trade agreement that both countries can agree on. So our trade agreement is going to be the following. Let's break it in three parts. Part number one, I give you, let's start with me. So I keep the same I used to consume before. Part number two, I send you the same you used to consume before. And then for part number three of the agreement, let's say we split excess in half. All right, now why is this agreement going to work? Well, it's going to work because we're basically agreeing to make both countries whole. In other words, we're both going to keep the same amount we had before, and then we're just splitting the excess in half. All right, so let's say that we're on the border here, and you got the US on the border. Imagine this being like a truck, okay? And so imagine that we have a truck on the border, and the truck is holding the amount that the US has, which in this case is 300, and what the US producing is QB. So we got 300 QB. All right, so let's execute our trade agreement. So one, the US is going to get to keep what they used to consume before. So let's put K for keep, and they're going to keep 150 because they used to eat that before. Right here, 150 QB. All right, now after you do the 150 for yourself, you still got 150 left. Now you got to send to Choitopia the 100 that they used to consume before. Remember, this blue represents consumption and production before trade. So we got to send across the border 100 So Choitopia gets 100 by trading, put T on trade here, okay? And then now we have 50 left compared to what we had before. According to the third portion of the trade agreement, we're going to split the excess in half. So we're going to take this number and basically divide it by 2. And then we got to send half this way. So an extra 25 due to trade. And the US gets to keep an extra 25. Alright, so let's create a little table here so we don't lose this. This is our consumption after trade. All right, so notice that Choitopia now gets to consume 125 QB. And the US gets to consume 175 cubic. You put the two together, total consumption is 300, and we have split the production of QB. Alright, now let's do the same for QA. So again, let's say we're at the border. Here's Choitopia. Choitopia is now holding the 300 QA that they produce. All right. So let's execute the trade agreement. 1. You get to keep the same amount you used to consume before. Choitopia before only used to produce B. They didn't make any A. So they get to keep nothing from that portion of the trade agreement. Second portion of the trade agreement. I'm going to send you the same you used to consume before. So now you got to send to the US what they used to consume before, which was 150 QA. So you got 150 QA, and the US got this through trade. All right, so take away 150 you sent to the other side, and we still got 150 left. All right, now the third portion of the agreement says we're going to split the excess in half. So we'll take that excess, we're going to divide it in two, and half is going to cross the border this way. So it's going to be an extra 75 that we're going to send on their truck to the US, and we're going to keep half as part of the agreement. And that's 75. And that's how much you get to keep. All right, let's summarize that. So if you look at the amount that the US is going to be consuming of QA, that number is 150 plus 75. So that's 225. And then if you look at the amount that Choitopia is going to be consuming, that's 75. We add those two, and we got a 300 production. All right, now you might be thinking, wait a minute, the Choitopia just produced 300 QA and they only get to keep 75. Well, this is wrong. But is it? Let's compare it to before. Before trade, Choitopia used to be here. This was the production and consumption point. Again, when you buy yourself, your production is your consumption. Now, look at their consumption point. So, Choitopia gets to eat 75 QA and 125 QB. So, it's 125 QB, which will be right here, and 75 QA, which will be somewhere on here. And this is going to be the new consumption point for Choitopia. So, this becomes consumption after trade. All right, now let's take a look and do the same for the US. The US is now consuming 225 QA and 175 QB. So that's 225 QA, which will be somewhere on here, and 175 QB, which will be somewhere on here. And the point is going to be somewhere over here. And that becomes now that point becomes US consumption after trade. All right, notice the gains from trade. The gain from trade is the difference between what you used to be, again blue, so where you used to be and when you are now. And so are the gains from trade for, all right, so What we have now again is the gains from trades, and the gains from trade is the difference between this point where they used to be before and the new point. All right, so that is basically our example for international trade using the production possibility frontier. Now, let's talk a little bit about factors of production. So the factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And land is basically anything that's a raw material. Labor is the people that work. Capital are the things that you use regularly all the time. So the machines, the tools, the computers, the stuff that you basically, like the factory, that's what we call capital. And then the entrepreneur is the person who operates the business. There are two basic markets that you can have. One is what we call the products market, and the other one's the factors market. The products market is a market for goods where you buy stuff, and then the factors market is a market where companies buy the factors of production, aka land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, both markets are basically connected, and they're connected through money. So right now, you're a household, and you are in the products market in a company getting this video. I am the guy who made the video, so I'm in the factors market in my business with this video. So right now I'm also a household, by the way, but I'm in the factors market working. You're a household in the products market buying. And we're meeting here in order to get this. Now notice that when it comes to money, there is a particular flow of money. Usually the direction is the one who buys pays the factory or the firm. All right? So we're all connected basically through money. So there is a circular flow, and this is something important when it comes to understanding how economies work. So because we're all connected through this flow, a slowdown on the amount of movement of money on this side can create a slowdown in the amount of money on this side as well. So when we say that the economy is in a quote-unquote recession, what it basically means is that the flow is slowing down. When we say that the economy is a expansion, it means that the flow is speeding up. All right, now let's talk about what exactly is a free market and why free markets normally tend to function better than restricted markets or centrally planned economies. A free market is a market with few government restrictions on how a good or service can be produced, sold, or how the factors of production are allocated. Most economies today are not really free markets, they're more like mixed economies with different levels of freedom on the market. The proponent that free markets were better than other markets was basically Adam Smith. Adam Smith was a Scottish philosopher, which is considered today the father of modern economics. He wrote a book called An Inquiry into the Causes of the Wealth of Nations in 1776. And what he basically said in that particular book, so sort of the book in a nutshell, is he provided the first arguments for a free market system. Adam Smith basically argued that everyone acting in their own rational self-interest would produce whatever we want to produce in the market through the process of the invisible hand. So the market by itself will promote the best goods and services desired in the system, and there is no need for kings and queens and guilds to run the system. So you don't need other groups of people to tell the other groups of people what to do. As long as certain little things are established in the market through the process of the invisible hand will do whatever it needs to be done. Another way, by the way, of thinking about this is, I get all the time students asking me, what's a good business to start? And there is no such a thing as an answer for that. The way you need to be approaching this problem is a good business is a business that addresses a need in society. So what's a good business? Well, a good business is you see a need and you feel a need, and that is your business. So you need to identify something that society needs, and then after that, how to do that. And that is what a good business is. So businesses are basically problem solvers. They look for things that society needs, they try to produce it first, so you can buy it from them and they can make money. All right, notice that what Adam Smith was basically saying is that these things can happen by themselves. You don't really need somebody to be telling you what to do all the time. This process it's sort of self-happening. People figure out what other people need, and then they create the services needed. Now, can you have a market system without a government? Not quite. I don't think anybody would argue that getting rid of the government completely is a good thing, because what you end up with is the Wild West. What you need is something we call a legally successful market system, which is basically a government as a part of the system to help the market function. So the government has to provide and secure rights and laws for the system. So things like having a constitution, having a police force, having courts to enforce contracts, and then having a punishment system for people who don't follow those contracts. One of the things that the government is supposed to basically secure for individuals and companies is property rights. Property rights are the rights of individuals or firms that they have to the exclusive use of their property, including the right to buy or the right to sell property. Property, by the way, can be tangible but can also be untangible, like an idea. Another thing the government is supposed to provide is protections for things that somebody has created, things like patents and copyrights. A patent basically gives an inventor the exclusive right to produce something for 20 years. A patent is what a lot of companies get when they become a sort of monopoly for a particular product for 20 years. Copyright protection is something that is given to somebody who created something, like a movie, for example. So copyright protection is basically says that only the person who created can copy the item that was created. So the creator is the only one that can copy it and sell it. Now you can sell your copyright to somebody for 50 years after the death of the creator, and that is the maximum amount that somebody can have a particular copyright protection. The last thing the government is supposed to provide is contract enforcement. Contracts are agreements between two people who sometimes don't know each other, they're not friendly with each other, they just do a business deal. If anybody could walk away from a contract anytime they feel like it without consequences, then there'll be people walking away from contracts all the time. So the government is supposed to basically create a system that would allow two individuals that don't know each other to engage in a contract, and then that contract will be executed. Now again, to understand protections that we have in the world today, especially in the US, imagine that you get a job with somebody and that person says, I'll pay you $10 an hour. The expectation is that every time you go to work, they're going to pay you $10 an hour. In other words, the expectation is that the contract is forever, and then if you renegotiate it, it will be higher. But how about if that person could break the contract anytime they want? So you wake up tomorrow morning, you go to work, you work, then they look at you and they say, oh, by the way, I know I said 10, but I can't, so I'll pay you 5. Here you go. Would you be happy? No, right? So enforcement of contract is something that the government is supposed to provide as well. If somebody signed a contract and said, I'll pay you this much, then they got to pay you that much. If you decided to say, get a car and you were going to pay them $30,000 over 6 years at 3%, then somebody also has to be able to enforce that contract. All right. So anyway, this ends our chapter on comparative advantage and how the market system works. I hope you like the explanation by Professor Choi. Have a good one.